sit down. And I want to start by introducing Josephine, who has a message for our Cantonese speaking community.
Thank you, Flo. Hi everyone, I'm going to say this in Chinese. If you need Cantonese translation, please go over to the side tables there, and we have headsets. 大家如果你需要中文翻譯嘅話咧，我哋旁邊嗰兩張台咧就有兒童機可以俾大家用嘅。如果你需要中文翻譯嘅話，請去到旁邊嗰兩張台，多謝。
I also want to ask all of you if you would make sure your cell phones are turned off for the next hour. I'm thrilled to see you here. I'm the president of the Mid-Sunset Neighborhood Association. And we've been around 45 years, but the association keeps getting bigger and bigger, and that's because there's more and more of a community interested in solving problems. And the problem today that we're going to be exploring is tetrachloroethylene, PCE. It's a toxin that you will learn about. What is it? Where is it? How did it get in our neighborhood? What can we do to have it remediated, to have it removed? So that's the goal of tonight, for us to really learn from the experts. Now, I was thinking, all communities, all neighborhoods have problems. What does it take to solve them? Because this is a problem that's solvable. Some problems are solvable. And it takes two things. First of all, it takes information, data, facts, knowledge, which you will receive tonight. And I appreciate your being here to get that knowledge. Second of all, it takes a sense of community. It takes people who want to work together to solve a problem. And the fact that you're here proves that we have a community. Because I'm here to tell you, after 45 years being an advocate for the neighborhood, one person makes no difference. Two persons, no difference. But when you have a group of people working together, you can move a mountain. So thank you very much for being here, because in fact, you're going to be the ones to help move the mountain. Let me give you the roadmap for today, and then I'm going to turn you over to speakers far wiser than I am. We're going to start by hearing from Paul Holzman in a minute. Paul was really the chief investigator to find out about this problem and explore it in depth and recruit some of these marvelous people to help us. He's also a board member and neighbor. After Paul, we'll hear from Lenny Siegel. Lenny Siegel was the mayor of Mountain View. He is also very much involved in understanding contaminated environments in urban areas and how to deal with it. And he is a supporter of affordable housing. After that, we'll hear from our own Don Moore, who's a neighbor, who is a professional geologist and whose profession is devoted to ways to deal with, assess, and remediate toxic substances. After that, Dr. Sam Goldman will speak. He is a professor of both medicine and neurology at UCSF and a physician there. And his primary interest and research is in environmental factors that contribute to diseases. Our own Supervisor Gordon Mar from District 4 will speak after that, and we have a few neighbors who will speak about their experiences knowing that their homes and the subsoil underneath their homes has high levels of PCE. And after the speakers, we will have a question and answer period. Ramisha will lead that. We hope that you will ask questions and make comments. I just need to say that no one person will have more than 2 minutes to ask the question or make the comment. And if you have it to a specific individual, we would appreciate that you ask the question to the specific individual and he or she will respond. After that, we will have our raffle, and I need to thank our wonderful merchants as well as neighbors and members of the board who contributed the over 30 gifts that we have for the raffle. So hold on to your tickets. Obviously the raffle is free, the gifts are free to you, and we will call the numbers of the 30 winners after the question and answer period. And finally, we have refreshments. So that's what we're going to be doing today. As the speakers are speaking, I will be passing out a fact sheet for you about tetrachloroethylene that you can have and you can keep. So you have that knowledge and you don't need to really take any notes. If at any point you would like to support our efforts, you should know that a part of the donations you make today will go to the Center for Public Environmental Oversight, which has been so helpful to us, a nonprofit organization that has helped us this past year, and a part will go to Mid-Sunset Neighborhood Association. Because everything costs money. Being here today costs money. Renting this hall costs money. Legal advice costs money. So we appreciate any support you can give us. And with that, I'm going to turn you over to Paul Holzman.
Thank you all for coming tonight.
Can you turn up the volume to the speakers?
I will.
Can't understand
Can you hear me now?
No. Can
You still
turn up
can't
the
hear.
volume? Can you ask the technician to turn up the volume of the speakers?
Sure.
We have our technical support staff here. Okay, how is that? You still can't hear me?
We can hear you.
Wow, okay. This is good, all right. So, as most of you know, my name is Paul Holzman. As most of you know, well, let's see. Okay. I think if you pointed directly towards that, it will be there. That's better. Okay. So as most of you know, the area around the 2500 block of Irving is, which is between 26th and 27th Avenue, has a plume of toxic gas underneath the surface. The gas is referred to as PCE and has been used in the dry cleaning business for decades, since the 1930s. Because PCE is linked to various forms of cancer and also to neurological diseases, such as Parkinson's, it will be banned in California for dry cleaners to use by the end of this year. What you may not know, though, is that the same toxic gas that's in the soil has also been found in the air inside of 6 homes that are the closest to the former police credit union building. And we received that news around Christmas time, late December, from the California Department of Toxic Substances Control, which is also known as DTSC. DTSC then resampled these same homes about a month and a half ago, and this time the four of the houses had even higher levels of PCE than before, unacceptably high. So it's clear that at least some families in the neighborhood unknowingly have been breathing this dangerous contamination for decades. What nobody knows yet, because no authority has wanted to look, is how many families, how many other families have been exposed to PCE in their homes and have been breathing this for decades. It angers me that 3 years into this investigation, no one is adequately addressing our community's concerns. And after spending $1 to $1.5 million, there are still no plans to actually clean up the PCE. The experts call this cleanup remediation, and what you do is you look for the sources, you see how far it's spread into the neighborhood, you come up with a plan to clean it, and you clean it up. And there are some very good ways to clean it up, and you'll hear about them tonight. But none of these things have happened at all. Now, most likely, the reason for this is that because the 2500 block is designated for housing development. There's an affordable housing project that is going up on the north side, and on the south side, there's a market rate one. There's a fear that if you truly recognize that PCE is a problem for the neighborhoods, and for future residents of the buildings, it might cause a delay in housing construction, and that might make it more difficult to get the necessary funding to build the housing. But this should really be a no-brainer. Relative to the $100 million it will take to build the affordable housing, and let alone the cost for the market rate one, remediation really is a drop in the bucket. In late October, DTSC issued an imminent and substantial endangerment order for the south side of Irving, where the Albright dry cleaners used to be. Oddly, DTSC never did the same for the north side, where the affordable housing project will be built, even though there was a dry cleaner there and the PCE levels are quite similar to what's on the south side. This entire site should be treated as one contaminated site with multiple responsible parties and agency involved in order to clean it up. First, the DTSC, whose stewardship of this process has been faulty from the start, and most recently is trying to apply a standard to our neighborhood for cleaning it up that no community that is concerned for its health would ever accept. Next, the police credit union, although they were able to sell their contaminated 2550 site, they still own a contaminated parking lot across the street that they want to turn into market rate housing. Right next to that is the site for the former Albright cleaners, so the owners of that are also part of this process. And finally, the developer of 2550, the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation, which is a very well-financed affordable housing developer that seems to be okay with putting 90 low-income families on contaminated soil and only mitigating it, which is a temporary solution for it. And they are supported by San Francisco Planning and the health departments, the Mayor's Office of Housing. All of them seem to be okay with this plan. Each was invited here tonight, but unfortunately they all declined to come. To be clear, MSNA supports the efforts to bring housing into this area. But housing, affordable or market rate, should never come at the expense of people's health and safety. You should be able to have housing and health. So that's what I had to say. We're going to start hearing from people with a lot more knowledge about this than I have. The first speaker is Lenny Siegel, and as Flo said, he's the former mayor of Mountain View. He's now the executive director of the Center for Public Environmental Oversight. He's a nationally known expert in the field of PCE contamination, and he'll be talking about how this contamination is typically investigated and resolved in a community such as ours.
Good evening. Addressing toxic contamination, such as the vapor intrusion we're talking about tonight, is a mixture of science and politics. And I used to say that to crowds like this, that don't worry if you don't understand this, it's rocket science. Well, in my community in the peninsula, we have a lot of rocket scientists, and they had trouble with it too. So it's complicated. Don't feel bad if you don't understand every aspect of what we're talking about tonight. The basics are pretty simple though. And secondly, the politics. I've been all over the country meeting with communities like this. The number one factor in getting your community cleaned up is showing up at meetings like this. I guess that's a paraphrase of Margaret Mead. We're talking about vapor intrusion, which is addressed through investigation, mitigation, and remediation. Investigation is in identifying the sources, pathways, and receptors. Sources are the soil gas, pathways are how it comes through the floor of a building, the receptors are us, our families. And that's called a conceptual site model, and the purpose of an investigation is to put data into that model. What are the sources? What are the pathways? What are the receptors? So it starts out as, they call it dry clean, but it's really wet. PCE, tetrachloroethylene, is a solvent, a liquid solvent, and at most dry cleaners it leaks into the subsurface through drains, sumps, and leaky sewer lines. Then it can enter the groundwater. Now the groundwater is really deep here, so that's not much of an issue. But it can become soil gas. Now, it took me a while to realize that there's actually gas in soil. You know, soil, you think of as solid. You know, when I plant plants, the clay where I live it's pretty muddy, but there's actually gas in the soil. So the liquid PCE volatilizes or vaporizes and sits in the soil as a soil gas, and it spreads in every direction. And that's what's happened here. And we have two likely sources: Miracle Cleaners, which was north of Irving, and Albright, which was south. And the way this investigation has been conducted, they first measured the soil gas. And they use something called a suma canister. Usually they have tubing that goes into the ground, vacuum that pulls things into this metal ball, and they measure the concentration of the soil gas. And based on that, they figure out whether it's likely that soil gas will be a problem inside the building, and then they sample the indoor air. And not all the gas goes up into the building. It's actually pulled up by the lower air pressure inside the building. But how much goes in depends upon the ventilation of the building and how well sealed the foundation is. So basically, like for the 6 houses north of the Police Credit Union building, they did soil gas sampling at the sidewalk, and the levels were above the soil gas screening levels, so they finally agreed to sample the indoor air. And you could go directly to sampling indoor air. That's what EPA does in my community, but the reason they sample the soil gas here is largely to determine the extent of the plume and the soil gas plume, where it spread, and whether to sample the indoor air. And indoor air sampling is pretty much done the same way. You have usually use a suma canister, which is this metal bowling ball with a vacuum inside. It pulls in the contamination, and they send it to a lab to be analyzed. And that's what they did, and they found that there's PCE in these houses. The first time they did some of the houses, they had the windows open. Then you're sampling the outdoor air to some degree. You're supposed to sample in the winter, which is a worst case. They haven't done that yet. That's a concern. But basically, they found in these homes, as well as the old Police Credit Union building, elevated levels of PCE. When they find elevated levels of PCE, the first thing to consider is mitigation. Mitigation is based on radon. Some parts of the country have naturally occurring radon that is sucked up into buildings, just the way PCE is. And the mitigation is to put pipes under the building, pipes with holes, and to create a vacuum under the building. So if there's anything going between the building and the subsurface, the soil gas, it's going to go down rather than up. And that is proposed for the new affordable housing complex at the Police Credit Union site. Thus far, DTSC has not agreed to do that for the homes, the 6 homes that they've sampled. And but it's very effective, but it's considered a short-term remedy. And that's part of the problem.
Please hold the microphone in front of your mouth, not to the side.
Sorry. So basically, the DTSC has not agreed to mitigate the homes, even though the indoor air found in those homes is above the screening level, because they've created they're proposing an action level which is 5 times the screening level, which is based on the cancer risk for PCE based on state studies. So one of the things that we're asking for is to have an action level that equals the screening level. We can get into that in more details later, you're talking about 0.46 micrograms per cubic meter, and it's really hard for most people to visualize what a microgram per cubic meter is. But basically, it's a standard that's been developed by state toxicologists based on the excess lifetime cancer risk, and I'm expecting Sam to talk about that somewhat. So mitigation's not enough, but it's good. It works as long as it works, and they should be doing that where they find elevated levels of PCE above the screening level in homes and other buildings. Then, what they should be doing is remediation. And Don's going to be talking about that. It's important to have a permanent remedy, and the best way to do that is to remove the contamination or cause it to be degraded. And in order to do that, you have to have an investigation that tells you where the sources are, like was it a sewer pipe or a sump in one of the buildings, what caused the contamination, and you have to know how widespread the contamination is, and they haven't done that. This is one of our complaints. They've only sampled 6 homes and 6 sidewalk spots away from the police credit union in the neighborhood. This stuff moves in every direction. So in order to remediate it, they have to do more investigation. And finally, Don's going to be talking about what they call presumptive remedies. For dealing with PCE and similar chemicals in subsurface, what you typically do, typical solutions are what's called soil vapor extraction or excavation. And he'll go more into that. But this community needs to work with experts and with elected officials, hopefully, to make sure that we not only get mitigation for the homes that are directly affected, but there's actual cleanup or remediation done at the site. Thank you.
Thanks, Lenny. My name's Don Moore. Let me step off to the side here. I'm an environmental consultant, California professional geologist, lots of experience managing contaminated sites under DTSC and State Water Board Oversight. I'm also your neighbor. I live with my family down at 18th and Irving. This map, it shows the neighborhood, the 2500 block of Irving Street back in 1928. What's remarkable about this is you look at a lot of the homes here, they're the same homes that exist today. And lo and behold, in 1928, here we had Miracle Cleaners actually operating at 2520 Irving Street. Yes, there were sewer lines beneath Irving Street serving the neighborhood. And then to the south side, Albright Cleaners was still 12 years away from being in operation. We have the Sunset Super shown for current reference point. So now we're going to fast forward 93 years into the future. When I first got involved in this project, the first thing I did as an environmental consultant and geologist, I took the available data and I contoured it. And this is what it looked like based on data from 2020 collected by the police credit union. They were investigating, this entire property, which is, slated for the affordable housing development. And what this shows is the outer contour is the commercial screening level set by the DTSC for PCE. This is also data from 15 feet. We're most concerned about data from 5 feet because that's what causes the vapor intrusion, but the 15-foot data gives you the best picture of really what happened here. What's, like Lenny mentioned, a conceptual site model. What went on here? But you can see decades of dry cleaning at these 2 dry cleaners, as well as these leaking sewer lines left this problem here. These levels underneath Irving Street, co-located with the sewer lines, are almost 40 times above the commercial screening level. You can see that there's, here's former Miracle Cleaner, here's former Albright Cleaner. One of the issues we have is there's a lot of data gaps. There's information that needs to be collected. So right now at Albright, the responsible parties there just collected earlier this month data for a source investigation. What Lenny was pointing out, that's what you do to develop, what are the levels here right at ground zero. So what this highlights though is the fact that here at the police credit union, underneath former Miracle Cleaner on the north side, there was never a source investigation conducted. So we don't know how significant a source is. We know it's a source because there's the PCE plume surrounding it, and here where they're discharging the sewer. So yeah, there's some significant data gaps. Another data gap is right here, the sewer lines. Anyway, you can see them. This thing's a little tricky. So sewer lines are a preferential pathway. We know back in the day that these dry cleaners were discharging the sewers, but because sewers are a pipe, we don't know how far it may be spreading laterally down Irving Street along the sewer alignment. So that's a data gap. Now, the most significant data gap, well, maybe not the most significant, but another notable one, you can see when I contoured this back a year ago, I drew dashed lines on the outer, sort of the outer part of, here was the contour from a year ago. We just learned of new data right here at 1326th Avenue. They just took samples at 12 feet right here, and this is showing us that we have to expand our contours now. I mean, this is 1,000 right here, so our 1,000 contour is going to get pulled all the way out here. So it's just showing this thing is what we thought it was a couple weeks ago is now like 25% bigger, which is informing us this thing could even get much bigger, particularly here to the south where there's a lack of data. Now let's start talking about, what could be done to clean it up and what's been proposed, which is the next slide. So we were given the opportunity to comment on TNDC's response plan last August during a public comment period. Right away, as an environmental consultant, and any experienced environmental consultant is going to look at the situation and say, okay, well, soil vapor extraction is something you need to look at here. But TND's consultant did not look at this. They proposed right here, number 3, which is the vapor mitigation system that Lenny and Paul mentioned, where it's essentially just protecting the future residents of that development. So we added soil vapor extraction to this feasibility alternative evaluation, and the yellow highlights represent sort of our adjustments to this evaluation. SVE has the highest overall ranking considering these feasibility study, sort of factors. It's the lowest cost, actually. This estimate is supported by a DTSC contractor that I have a relationship with. We know, so soil vapor extraction is like, say, imagine putting a straw into the ground and sucking out of it, just creating a vacuum. So just like the soil vapors have dissipated laterally into the neighborhood and the very permeable dune sands, we can suck those right back up with soil vapor extraction and actually reach out into the neighborhood beyond the footprint of the proposed affordable housing development, in effect, and remediate the vapors that are underneath the homes that we know have vapor intrusion going on. In fact, it's really surprising this was overlooked because DTSC's own guidance recommends soil vapor extraction and soil excavation as alternatives for remediating this exact type of situation. Tom Soper's here. He will tell you that there's going to be some level of soil excavation going on with this development anyway, but he's presented development scenarios that include underground garages that would benefit the property, solve the parking problem we know that's coming, and also have a real huge remedial benefit if that's something that was done. So yeah, it's a flawed response plan. A response plan is like a cleanup plan, but there's actually no cleanup that's been proposed by the developer, which is, frankly, a slap in the face to the neighborhood, I feel. Next slide. So, summary, there were development decisions made by DTSC and SF planning without a full understanding of the environmental conditions out here. There's still data gaps, major data gaps, the source investigations, the lateral extent, the sewer lines are big data gaps that need to be addressed by DTSC and the responsible parties. The response plan is not a cleanup plan. It's a plan that we see as technically flawed because it failed to consider soil vapor extraction, the cheapest and best alternative that, you know, sort of is real cleanup that we would be able to accept. As Paul mentioned, you've seen that map. This looks like one problem. This needs to be managed in a coherent, you know, sort of as a single site, but you know, we know there's different responsible parties, so you need to manage it in a coordinated approach, and we don't see that happening with DTSC. There's just frankly, it seems like there's a lack of leadership there. And Lenny was pointing out the indoor air concentrations that are of concern, and DTSC has suggested sort of arbitrarily and conveniently based on sort of risk assessment jargon that I know that a lot of the neighborhood, the neighbors, the affected neighbors didn't really understand, but they're proposing an action level that's 5 times above their own indoor air screening level. And I work directly with sites in California where the screening level in residential settings equals the action level, and they're trying to raise it by 5-fold here. That's what they're suggesting. I don't know if they've made a decision on that. But you know, here's our conclusion is, why should the community accept any excess cancer risk? You heard Lenny use that term, that's a DTSC term, when a real cleanup is simple, fast, and inexpensive. We know they're demoing that building soon. They could be soil vapor extracting in months from now, getting us some permits, and they could be halfway towards cleanup by the end of this year if the responsible parties and the property owner get together. And I mean, the point is that Lenny made and Paul made is, you know, why would you build something, you know, on a contaminated site in you know, it's affecting the current residents, and it's going to make it safer for the future residents. So anyway, happy to answer any other questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to turn it over to Sam right now.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm happy to share what I know about the health risks of PCE exposure. My background is as an epidemiologist and environmental medicine physician at UCSF. So epidemiology is the science that studies the rates, distribution, and causes of diseases. And the way that we do that is by comparing the rates of diseases in a very simple way between people who are and are not exposed to environmental toxicants. It's hard to do. It's really hard to know what people are exposed to over the course of their lifetimes. It's hard to know which exposures we care about. Do we care about long-term low-level exposures? Do we care about short-term high-level exposures? The relevance of an exposure to a disease is going to be very different if it's in a child versus an elderly person. It's also going to vary potentially quite dramatically depending on an individual's genetic makeup. So for a compound such as PCE, which is metabolized by the body after it's absorbed, individuals who have genes that alter the activity of some of those metabolic enzymes are going to be at higher or lower risk of health effects from that. Even though there's a lot of uncertainty, there's one thing that's key in epidemiology, and that is that the dose makes the poison. That's a term that's been recognized for 600 years or so in toxicology. So the more of something, of a toxin that you're exposed to, the more likely it is to have an adverse health effect. And the other thing is with epidemiology, the most important thing is replication of a result. So we never rely on the result of a single epidemiologic study, we take the totality of evidence. And that is what the risk assessment procedure is supposed to do. So there are federal agencies that determine what are safe levels. They make legal requirements or they make recommendations, and these are like EPA and CDC, they're also state agencies, and they use the totality of the human epidemiologic data as well as studies in animals and in test tubes, and now we're using computers to try to model toxicity. And the risk agents, these agencies then rate the probability of cancer as an outcome for a particular exposure, as well as non-cancer outcomes, and then they will set levels that they consider acceptable risk. I'm not going to go into the detail of that because I don't understand it, it's rocket science. But what I do understand is that the totality of the human epidemiology is that PCE is a carcinogen. The EPA and IARC, the International Agency on Cancer Research, agree that it's probably carcinogenic, and the most likely forms of cancer that it's capable of inducing are bladder, multiple myeloma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Possible cancer risks are esophageal, kidney, lung, and breast, and this is supported in human and animal studies. Non-cancer endpoints, so-called for PCE, the most sensitive non-cancer endpoint is thought to be brain and behavior or neurotoxicity, and this is based on animal and human data that chronic exposures can affect color vision, mood, memory, and reaction time. My work is focused on Parkinson's disease. We conducted a study in 100 twin pairs, where one twin had Parkinson's and one didn't, and we looked at what was different about them. And we observed that the twin who had been exposed to PCE through their work had a 10-fold increased risk of Parkinson's disease. We recently replicated this observation in a large study in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where PCE and a related compound called TCE were contaminating the water supply for 35 years. And we found a 70% increased risk of Parkinson's disease in individuals who had lived at Camp Lejeune. Other non-cancer endpoints include kidney, liver, blood, immune system, and reproductive, including higher rates of infertility and possible developmental effects on young children. So in summary, with sufficient exposures, PCE can cause cancer, neurological, and reproductive harm. However, most human epidemiology studied highly exposed populations, so workers, people who handled PCE, and whether individuals who are at low exposure for long periods of time, whether they are at risk for these conditions is not known based on the current human epidemiology. But what we do know is the dose makes the poison, and even though we're uncertain about the level of risk, we do know that lowering the exposure will lower the risk from PCE for any of these health outcomes. That was quick. If anyone wants to email me or reach out to me, samuel.goldman@ucsf.edu, and I'd be happy to talk to you in depth about some of these issues. Supervisor Mar.
Well, actually, first I really want to express my deep thanks to MSNA for hosting this really important community meeting this evening, but really for all of the work that MSNA has done in investigating the really serious issue of the toxic contamination, starting at 2550 Irving that we are aware of, and now we can see that the problem is broader, covering the entire block of 2500 Irving and beyond. And thanks so much to Lenny, Don, and Sam for providing their expertise on this. And I I'm really glad I was able to make it to this community meeting this evening. I was able to get somebody to cover another meeting, monthly meeting that I was supposed to attend, because I understand how important this is for the neighborhood. And it's really important for me to, personally as well, as somebody that's been a lifelong environmentalist. I worked as a campaign director for the Bay Area Environmental Health Collaborative, and also I was a co-chair of the Southwest Network for Environmental Justice and a commissioner on the San Francisco environment as well. So these are extremely important issues to me personally. I also did want to start by sort of stating that our just awareness of the toxic contamination in the block of 2500 Irving was really came about through the affordable housing development at 2550 Irving. And I mean, this is contamination that's been in the soil, under the businesses and homes on this block and beyond for decades. But it was really because of the affordable housing development, at 2550 Irving, that the testing first happened, first on that site, and then broadly. And it was also what led to the identification of the second source of PCE contamination across the street at Albright Cleaners at 2511 Irving. So I just think it's important to acknowledge that that's really because of the affordable housing development proposed at that site that the neighborhood is now aware of this and really working together to address this problem. And I think also because of the, my understanding of how important this is to the neighborhood and also to me personally, when the Board of Supervisors was considering the mayor's resolution back in July of last year to approve the loan for the affordable housing development. I added a set of amendments, and one of the most important amendments that I added to the mayor's resolution was just acknowledging that DTSC did find elevated levels of PCE on the site, and was requiring TNDC to create a response plan to address the contamination, and that the loan that the city was going to provide, for the acquisition of the site and the development was contingent on DTSC approving the response plan from TNDC. So that was added in the resolution that the board adopted, approving the loan agreement last July. And after that, TNDC did develop their response plan. I think as the speakers had mentioned, it was the lowest cost response to the contamination at 2550 Irving, which is just the vapor mitigation barrier. And even though, actually it's not the lowest cost, right? Because I think, Don, you're saying that...
It was they had a no action alternative. Yeah, TNDC had a no action alternative, soil excavation that was skewed high, and then just the mitigation system. It was our analysis where we added in the soil vapor extraction, which is actually the lowest cost remedy, backed up by DTSC contractor cost estimates. So yeah, Gordon, that's the lowest one is one that they didn't even talk about or propose. So we think that should be considered because it is the lowest cost.
Yeah, so I think that just highlights, just a lot of the problematic process and oversight that DTSC has, and the role that DTSC has played in this issue. But nevertheless, the DTSC did approve TNDC's response plan, and TNDC has moved ahead, with submitting their proposal to the planning department, and is, as we know, is planning to move ahead with the development in the coming year. But I think also, as the speakers have highlighted, this just also highlighted the broader problem, in the neighborhood where we have two sources of PCE contamination on the block, in one commingled toxic plume, under the street, under the businesses and homes. Yet DTSC has really been doing oversight to this problem in a very scattered way. They have 4 separate oversight agreements right now with different parties. There's one agreement with TNDC for 2550 Irving. There's a separate agreement with the Police Credit Union for the off-site contamination in the homes north of 2550 Irving. There's a separate agreement with the owner of the 2511 Irving across the street, the former cleaner site. And then now there's a fourth agreement with the owner of the apartment building, the existing 6-story apartment building on the corner. And there's probably going to be a fifth agreement with the parking lot that the Police Credit Union is planning to develop in market rate housing. So it's been very frustrating, dealing with TNDC, with DTSC, because they're treating these as 4 and now 5 separate sources of contamination and cleanup plans, when it really, I think as Paul and Don have stated, it really should be treated as one toxic site, from multiple sources, and there should be a comprehensive cleanup plan for the entire site, really holding all the parties accountable. And I think that's, maybe the final point to mention is that it really seems like the way they're doing it in these 4 and possibly 5 separate oversight processes, we're really seeing all the parties really trying to minimize their liability and their financial commitment to what's going to be required for a real cleanup that's going to ensure the health of the neighborhood. So I'm in strong support of MSNA in your effort here. I've been pushing DTSC to treat this as one project and come up with a comprehensive cleanup plan. And at least on Monday of this week, on April 22nd, they did issue a community update. And for the first time, they listed all the separate oversight processes in one community update. So at least that's a step forward. But again, it's really important that we see one comprehensive cleanup plan and that really holds all the parties accountable. So maybe I'll leave it at that. And again, would love to open to answer questions and engage in the discussion with all of you. And now we'll turn it over to Ji Kwan.
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Yi-Kwan Lee. This is a very technical issue, but to me as a neighbor, it's very emotional. My house was checked for toxic air vapor twice, along with 5 other houses. PCE were found both times in all of the homes. Levels were over 2 to 4 times the screening level. I've lived in this house with my husband, my 2 children, for over 20 years. If we have been breathing in PCE for that long, I believe our health is at risk. Scientists walk around our house with a detection device and they found a hotspot in the downstairs shower. The toxic vapor was coming through the floor drain. Lenny advised us to block the drain and to cover it with duct tape. We can't use the shower anymore. My 84-year-old mother from Taiwan used to come and stay with us during the summer. She can't do that anymore because her room is contaminated. We have to leave our window open in the very cold days to keep the house ventilated. DTSC keeps saying that they need to test again and again, but nothing gets done to clean up the toxins. Instead, they suggested that if the level gets 2.5 times higher, only then would they take any action inside my home. I have 2 children, one 20-year-old, one 18-year-old. I brought them into this world, living in this house their entire life. Imagine how I feel as a mother when I found out the guilt that I had towards my own children. When my daughter finally went to college, we celebrated. She's out of the PCE home. Breathe the clean air now. Even though it's Davis, inland might be bad, but better than PCE. My son is gonna go, and imagine how I feel. Having them digging in the backyard since they were little, not knowing that the vapor coming through the soil coming inside the house can stay for days and days and days. I'm not asking for much. I just want the toxic vapor taken out of my home so I can live with my family without getting poisoned by cancer-causing chemicals. I just have 2 questions. Number 1, what risk should the neighborhood accept with PCE? Is 2.0 an acceptable risk level for a family living in the house for 20 to 30 years? Number 2, how far out in neighborhood should houses be tested for indoor air contamination? Thank you.
I think maybe before we start the Q&A, there are actually 2 questions.
One more neighbor.
2 more neighbors.
Hi,
everyone. My name is Layla, and this is my husband, Shane. We are one of the families that live very close to this PCE vapor contamination. We have 2 kids and 2 senior parents, a typical Sunset family living with us in this home. And we've lived here for almost 8 years now. Recently, as part of the investigation of the PCE contamination on the 2500 block of Irving, our indoor air was tested, and some of the results have been very alarming for us. I understand Equan's feelings completely. We know there's PCE vapor under and around our and our neighbors' homes, that it's possibly seeping, proven seeping into our homes at various concentrations during different times of the year and depending on cracks and foundations of our very old 100-year-old homes. Imagine living in your house for years with your kids and your elderly relatives and finding out that you may have been exposed to dangerous cancer-causing chemicals in your own home. Imagine how stressful that would be. Our neighborhood is living through this stress right now. As this toxic vapor spreads, so will the risk from more and more residents who are currently wondering, just like us, if their homes are safe for them and their kids. We're asking from the DTSC, the city, and our Supervisor Mar to ensure that the full extent of the contamination is properly determined as soon as possible and is cleaned up completely. It has to be done completely. Good enough is not sufficient. Our homes should be returned to their original states and be made safe as they were before this contamination. Any further development on this block should be put on hold until the full investigation is complete and appropriate cleanup actions are determined and completed. If any new building is built in this area before it is really known where the true sources are, any future investigations and cleanup might be more costly or even impossible to fully accomplish. I would like all the parties involved in working on this resolution for this issue and all the parties involved in future developments in this area to truly understand the stress this is bringing to the nearby residents for our health and the health of our families. What we are asking of DTSC, the city, and our supervisor is very reasonable, and I would imagine something they would insist on for their own homes and their own families if they were in a similar situation. So DTSC, Mayor, and Supervisor Mar, please ensure a solution to this situation that you would want to see for your own homes and your own families if you were in our place. Thank you.
We thank everyone for coming this evening. This now concludes our presentation, but we do have plenty of time for Q&A. I will request anybody who has a question to please line up at either of our mics at either end of the room to the sides of our presenters. Please limit your questions and comments to 2 minutes. I will be timing them, only to make sure everybody here has a chance to express their concerns and address any questions they might have. With that, the gentleman here has lined up. Sarah, would you please introduce yourself. Please identify who you're asking or addressing a question
I'm gonna make
to.
a comment. After listening to everybody, I have to say something. I live 5 houses around the corner from the parking lot. I was a delivery person for the post office for 42 years. I bought my home in 1979, and in 1980, I went to a urologist, and he told me I had bladder cancer. And I don't like to put my health business out in the street, but I think this is important after the doctor talked about it. My urologist taught at Stanford, and he asked me, do I work around chemicals? And I said, no. And I said, why? Because a lot of people get bladder cancer from that. He taught at Stanford. He also asked me, is there any cancer in your history, in your family? And I said, no. Thank God he caught the cancer in time, and I had to get checked every 3 months, 6 months, and a year. I just wish I had enough money to sue somebody that I got this cancer from, because for years I didn't know where it came from. And now after everybody's speaking, now I know where. And if they start digging up that dirt and people start getting sick, I hope they sue all those people responsible for digging it up, the people and all the organizations and companies. The other thing is, you're talking about testing. I live 5 blocks from that corner. They only tested 3 houses. They stopped at 4, they stopped at 5. Now, I hear that there was a gas station, and I know there was a mortuary, because I've been living there since '79. Is there any poison coming out of those businesses? That's my question to you. And there was something else, but, you know, I didn't write this down because I didn't know if all you guys were going to talk about that, you know? But I have, and I don't like to put my health business out here, but I think it's important. If people start getting sick out there because they start digging up 2 minutes, oh, forget it.
Hi. Is this on? Okay. Hi, Patrick Wolf. I live 7 houses away from the project. I'm directing my question to Supervisor Mar. Supervisor, we've spoken before about other matters. I'm speaking as a resident, and I'm also speaking as someone who supports this project. So I want this housing to be built. I want the affordable housing to be built. I want the market rate housing to be built. I want it to be built in a way that's responsible for the community. But I want the housing to be built, and I especially want it to be done safely. And I'm directing this question to Supervisor Mar because you are the one person in this room who matters. This is your job. You represent us. We have district elections because you are supposed to balance the needs of the city and the people you represent in your district. I heard you say that you appreciated this work. I did not hear you say that you were going to ensure that this gets cleaned up properly before it's built. And so my questions for you are, 1, are you going to make sure that this is properly remediated? Number 2, if you're not going to, why? And number 3, if you live 7 houses away, and it was you and your wife and your daughter whose health was affected, would you ensure that this was remediated properly? Thank you, and I appreciate the answer.
Thank you for those questions, Patrick. And yeah, absolutely, you know, whether or not, I mean, if I was living, you know, in your home or in the block, you know, I would be feeling the same way. And I feel the same way about it now, even though I live, you know, farther away in the neighborhood, that our community, the Sunset District, and everyone in the city, you know, deserves to have full, comprehensive cleanup when it comes to toxic contamination that's affecting the, you know, the health of their families. And so again, in this case, you know, I've been very clear with DTSC that they need to treat this as one comprehensive cleanup plan and hold all the parties accountable for a full and comprehensive cleanup that's going to protect the health of their neighborhood. That's been clear. I mean, I'm the district supervisor, so I'm not, you know, the head of the Cal EPA or the Department of Toxic Substance Control, who really has the authority over the oversight process here. But I've been doing everything I can to push them on and working in support of MSNA's efforts. I know there's been ongoing and regular communication from MSNA to DTSC about this, and I've been also supporting that with my communications. I'm also looking into sort of the broader problem that this highlights in the city, where development is being pushed, you know, in such a heavy-handed way at the expense of neighborhood health and also neighborhood character as well. And a lot of that is there's been these laws enacted on a state level that streamline development processes. And in this case, at 2550 Irving, they're taking advantage of SB 35 that Senator Wiener sponsored that exempts this project from CEQA review. And so I think we're in a challenging situation. You know, I stood up to these state laws that are overriding our local ability, neighborhood ability to be able to ensure that development that's happening in our neighborhoods, you know, is really appropriate and it's going to protect our neighborhoods.
Respectfully, Supervisor Mar, I think we appreciate all of that. I don't think we heard you say you were going to make sure this is remediated.
Well, again, Patrick, I mean, I've made that clear in my communications to DTSC, and I support MSNA's, you know, demands and engagement with them. I'm the District 4 Supervisor. I'm not the head of DTSC. I'm not the project oversight staff.
Hello, Michael Weiss. I live actually across the street from the former police credit union. So I understand what you're having to say about SB 35, its impact on the ability to have things happen as part of the project oversight. But my understanding of SB 35 is that it does not exempt a site that is on the Cortese list from environmental review. And given that the former Albright cleaners, which is part of clearly a single site, is on the Cortese list, and given that this is in fact a single contaminated site, and furthermore, given that you did in fact manage to influence how this was progressing up to this point, you in fact got legislation through the Board of Supervisors for a requirement for at least a mitigation, if not remediation. It strikes me that you are in fact in a position to be able to influence this through further legislation through the Board of Supervisors, to be able to consolidate this as a single site, and to be able to have it therefore considered as a single site to address. Am I mistaken in my understanding of what you're capable of here?
So that's a really great question. That's a great idea. Is there some way on a local level that we can mandate that the state treat this as one? And because it's really the state Department of Toxic Substance Control that has oversight over the response plan, the mitigation and remediation plan. But that's something I would definitely look into. If there's some local policy or motion we can take. I don't know, Lenny, you've dealt with these on a lot more, like in many cities.
So first, I think County of San Francisco Planning Department, I guess it is, could recognize that it's a single site and that the Cortese listing for the Albright contamination applies to the contamination, not just to the source area at the Albright cleaners. So I think San Francisco could do that. It makes sense. When I was on the council in Mountain View, we actually pioneered the use of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, to reinforce requirements for cleanup. And when I was on the council, we would add notification of residents and additional monitoring using our CEQA powers beyond what the state and federal agencies were requiring. So CEQA is a tool to protect the environment and can be used to do that. And it's really ironic that we have contaminated properties exempt from CEQA.
Okay, so I have two questions. One is for Supervisor Mar. Back several years ago, I used to work at a job where I had to do a lot of advocacy for underrepresented communities. And at that time, supervisors would come together and support each other on an issue. So if, for example, you have a situation here in your district, do you have any support from any other supervisors that would be reinforcing not only the planning commission, but even to have the mayor understand this is a serious problem? Because historically, the Sunset, or the west side of San Francisco, has always been underrepresented, and this is clearly an example. And it continues. So do you have support from, or have you even tried to collaborate with other supervisors to make this issue surface even further?
Thanks for that question. And actually, I did want to say that this highlights probably a much broader problem throughout our city, because there's a lot of, in fact, most of the development that's happening in the city right now is happening on infill sites, and many of them are former gas stations or dry cleaners or mortuaries. In fact, in the Sunset District right now, besides 2550 Irving, and there are two recently completed projects. There's the Gus's Community Market Project on Noriega, I think around 44th Avenue, and then there's also a newly completed project on Terraville and 33rd Avenue that were former gas stations, and then there's two other projects that were approved but haven't been constructed that are gas station conversions too. So I think this highlights a much broader problem where a lot of the housing development in our city, again, in this rush to build as much housing as possible, as tall as possible.
So excuse me. I understand that you're repeating yourself, and we know this, especially for long-time residents. But I asked you a question. Do you at least communicate and ask other supervisors to support you on such matters as this, and to come together unified as multiple districts and to support you? Yes or no? Yes?
Yes.
Or no?
Yes,
And,
on
okay,
the broader
and,
issue,
and
not...
who? Name one other supervisor who supports you.
Well, so I have been working on the broader issue of development on contaminated sites. I sponsored the resolution at the Board of Supervisors supporting SB 37 last year, which is a state bill that would prohibit local planning departments from exempting...
But Supervisor Mar, we're talking about this issue here. We're not talking about what other bills that you have supported. We are talking about this situation now. This is the first time I've heard about this after reading it in the Sunset Beacon. I'm absolutely floored that no one has brought the media, has brought the news to report this. Have you done studies of cancers related to this toxic, and to see and come up with statistics on that and bring that up to the housing authority and suggest that that statistics will be that when everything gets built. It's data, as you say, doctor. And I work in the industry. I work for the pharmaceutical industry, so I know. And if you tell them that the percentage of cancers in this area, sorry. So that's all.
So I understand the question. Again, The oversight agency that really has authority here is the State Department of Toxic Substance Control. So that's where MSNA's focus has been. That's where my focus has been. It's not, but I do appreciate this idea that we can possibly take some action on a local level to get the planning department to designate this as one site, and that's something I will definitely commit to following up on.
Hi, I live on the 26th Avenue, and obviously a lot of families in this neighborhood are really nervous, scared. I have a question for Lenny and for Don. What do you think in terms of how far out we should be looking to see how far the problem goes into our community?
There's a simple strategy called stepping out. And basically there's a soil gas screening level, which we all agree on. You know, we aren't challenging the state regional board's screening level for PCE and soil gas. You keep sampling the soil gas until you get to a point where you're below the screening level. I mean, Don showed a map. That was the screening level for commercial, that is less protective exposure standard than for residential, because people are at home more than they are at work. So even with the existing data, which is all somewhat speculative, it's dotted lines that he has, the plume would go further, but you basically keep sampling until you get to the point, not of non-detect, but where you're below the screening level. And that's the standard way of doing it. There's never been an effort. Well, contaminated groundwater moves in the direction of groundwater. That's where we come up with the term plume. It looks like a feather. So you see a groundwater plume, it's elongated. Soil gas moves in every direction. And so they should be sampling in the neighborhood in every direction around these two known source areas until they come to consistent sampling, which is below the agreed upon screening level for PCE in residential areas.
Thanks, Lenny. I think that covered it, but sort of an example of what Lenny was referring to as step-out locations was highlighted on the new information, the new data that we just found out about last week for 1300 26th Avenue. I was highlighting that how I'm going to have to change my contours on the map that I produced a year ago based on this new information. I don't know if it's, there was a prior, this one right here, you can see there, the new data contour is expanding what we sort of viewed as the footprint, but it was obviously, Lenny noted, the dashed line. So this is telling us that, yeah, this sand is very transmissive and this stuff moves out into the neighborhood. And so you can see where the dashed line, particularly on the south side of Irving, where there's less data, you know, you might imagine that it's going to expand just like it has over here for 1300 26. I mean, this thing could grow to, you know, maybe twice the size we're seeing it right now and we're interpreting it. But that's one of the big significant data gaps that needs to be addressed by DTSC and the responsible parties that they need to be, you know, the DTSC needs to hold them accountable to do that. It's part of any standard environmental investigation. Delineate the extent.
Just to follow up on that, I'm asking anybody on the panel now, how do we get that done?
We're trying. We are hammering DTSC. We are calling them out on things that aren't right. You know, calling their...
Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're... Just this morning, I mean, they put this community update out. So the community update has the DTSC's mission statement. It says, our mission is to protect people, communities, environment of California from harmful chemicals by cleaning up contaminated sites. Does anyone feel like that's happening here? No. I mean, it's like the response. The police credit union, we know they moved down the street, but they're the ones who did an inadequate investigation, the DTSC is not holding them accountable. They've terminated their agreement with DTSC. DTSC is now spending our tax dollars to sample in these homes when the police credit union should be doing that and paying for it and doing a lot more. Talking about, a coordinated effort on cleanup that DTSC's leadership could do is, the property is going to have more value to the developer if it's clean, right? They're not going to have to put in this complex mitigation system that Lenny will tell you people stop paying attention to and may, not be working 5-10 years. And then you're going to have people in this affordable housing building that are being exposed. But we don't know those people. Those are future neighbors. We don't even know if this project's going to get built. I mean, there's support for it, but what about the people right now? That's what we need to focus on.
Hello, my name is Anthony Helton. I live on Lincoln Way. And I do have a background in soil contamination by similar chemicals. So my question is, we know that there can be a removal of the vapor by vapor extraction, but that does nothing really if the bulk contamination remains in place. So are there plans really to address the soil contamination by soil removal, and where possible, then that soil be taken to an approved site? Otherwise, the vapor phase will continue until we have the source removed or depleted to a level that is of no further concern.
Yeah, I'm gonna have Don and Lenny say something, but we also have Tom Soper who can also say something about the soil removal as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Your point is well taken, because that was one of the data gaps, the significant data gaps that we've highlighted, is the fact there has not been a source investigation on the north side in the footprint of Miracle Cleaners. We know, so you're right, we don't know the levels, and so until you have that data, you don't know what approach you would take. Like you're saying, a removal action may be appropriate if we find very high levels there, because that's the source of the dissipating vapors. We do know that earlier this month, the former Albright Cleaners was investigated, an appropriate investigation, which further highlighted, so we're going to see data at Albright soon, but there's no one proposing to do the same thing on the north side. I mean, the police credit unions left the neighborhood. They terminated their agreement. DTSC missed that. We called them out on that this morning in an email, and I'm just not sure, how that's going to get done. But yeah, we should turn it over to Tom, because he can. Tom, you want to talk about soil excavation?
Thank you. It's nice to be here this evening. I'm a professional architect. I've been practicing for over 40 years, and I volunteered my services to the neighborhood to help them understand this problem that we have. I'm actually an affordable housing advocate myself, but I want to talk tonight a little bit about the relationship between this building and the contamination. And this is a drawing that I did to try to help people visualize what the problem is. And this is, imagine that you are a hawk that's flying over the land towards Golden Gate Park. And on the lower right corner, you see a blue star shape on the ground. And you see the outline of the buildings that frame Irving Street. So the blue plume is from the Albright cleaners, and then across the street, you see superimposed on the land at 2550 Irving, the massing of the affordable housing, which is 7 stories tall. And the green star shape on the ground is the Miracle Cleaners plume. These plumes are probably about 200 feet in diameter at least, because as Lenny said, they are like a flower. They go in every direction. So in understanding how to make a 7-story building stand on this site on sand dunes below, you have to build a very thick concrete slab. So what does that mean in terms of what the developer is already planning to do? Well, they're going to have to strip the top of that site, but they're going to have to dig down into the contaminated soil at least 3 feet to accommodate that necessary foundation to support a 7-story building. Now, in addition to that, they have elevators that are going to excavate even deeper into that contaminated soil. And thirdly, with their parking garage, they will be digging pits for stacked parking into the contaminated soil, right where the green is shown here. So they've already begun in motion excavation of the site. So from an architect's perspective, we always look at this problem as a comprehensive solution. And as Lenny and Don have argued, that this is really a problem of remediation. We should not be talking about mitigation, because a mitigation is a temporary solution, and especially for residents, whether it is affordable housing or market rate housing, has to be healthy. So I have proposed that we do excavate just a little bit further down than what they are already proposing to do. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? And so what we can do by utilizing a basement in this building, we bring the building down by 1.5 stories, which makes more sense to the neighborhood, and it also fulfills the objectives that the city always purports, which is to enhance and improve the life outcome of low-income people. They need to have cars to get to work. They need to have cars to get to work. So excavation is my recommendation. It's remediation. And I hope that we can call upon Supervisor Mar to help us reach that goal. Thank you.
My turn? I'm Peter Manis. I'm a clinical faculty at UCSF, and I've raised my family on 26th Avenue for over 10 years. I have a comment and a question for Supervisor Mar. My comment is I'm hearing many very constructive ideas about remediation coming from the non-politician side of this panel at the far end. Very good ideas about deeper excavation, about extraction, and so on. There's no shortage of good ideas about remediation. What I feel is that we have a shortage of political action. I do not see a political action plan from Supervisor Mar. I hear that he's frustrated, and I think perhaps he's on the verge of admitting he's been helpless dealing with an agency like DTSC. And I don't underestimate the power of bureaucracy. But my question is, can we have a political action plan? Not a excavation plan or an engineering plan, but a political plan that organizes allies, maybe with the Board of Supervisors, as someone else mentioned, possibly an engagement with the mayor, possibly an engagement with federal agencies, from the EPA or starting locally. That's been weak so far. Is there a political action plan that can make some of this happen. Because it's clear to me, from what I'm hearing, that the rate limiting step is not in the lack of ideas. It's in the lack of political action and mobilization. So what can you speak to a political action plan that you will either lead or participate in?
Thanks for that question. I appreciate all the ideas that have come up in this discussion, and I've been taking notes. And I mean, one idea that I have in terms of a political action plan that might help with the 2500 block of Irving right now is engaging with our state electeds, and I haven't really talked to Phil Ting and now Matt Haney, my former colleague on the Board of Supervisors, is stepping in, David Chusey. So, and trying to work with them to get, again, DTSC to play a much more health protective and community supporting role in their oversight of these 4 separate projects that they're doing on this block. And then again, I will look at what we can do legislatively or from a policy perspective on a local level to try to force this situation to be treated as one project, one cleanup project with a comprehensive remediation plan for the entire plume from multiple sources. On a broader level, this has spurred me to start discussions with the city attorney's office on new legislation that would address the lack of thorough environmental review on projects on contaminated sites. And again, we see this all over, even in the Sunset District. There's 4 projects that have been approved that are on gas station sites where the planning department granted a common sense exemption from CEQA on those projects. The Chronicle had an article about that a couple years ago. And again, this for 2550 Irving, they're using the state law, SB 35, to become exempt from CEQA as well. So we're looking at a local version of what I mentioned was SB 37 that I sponsored the resolution that was unanimously supported by the board last year, endorsing that would prohibit the use of common sense exemptions by the planning department on projects on contaminated sites.
Well, you keep going from the particular to the general.
Sorry, we do have other questions. I'm sorry, but your 2 minutes were up. Thank you.
One last quick comment. It'd be very helpful if you would issue a monthly bulletin about your actions so that we can keep posted on your action plan.
Thank you.
I do have a monthly newsletter that we send out, and if you want to get on our email list, if you're not already, you could email my office at marstaff@sfgov.org, and that does have updates on our legislative and neighborhood work.
Kathleen Kelly, I live at 26th and Irving, and my question is very similar to the last gentleman's. It appears to me, we've been working on this for over a year and a half, 2 years. The city hasn't done anything to help us. SF Planning is not listening. We're all pretty frustrated, and we've spent lots of money trying to get help, and we're on our own. We've been on our own. We're swimming alone. So my question is, where do we take it now? Can we go to the EPA? Who's the next step above? Because clearly the city level, the state level is not helping much, and we need action.
I don't know if somebody has an answer. I mean, I think one thing that I know I've heard is since we've kind of we've been kind of confronted with a stone wall and lack of responsiveness from DTSC, that the next level above them would be the Cal EPA, and and to take it to them. So, but I don't know if somebody else has other responses to that question.
Yeah, I don't expect US EPA to get engaged this site, but I'm actually a little bit hopeful. In the latest letter we got from DTSC, they were saying, well, we really haven't made our decisions yet. either on the action level or on remediation. So I actually think that the work that people in this neighborhood have been doing are reaching decision makers at Department of Toxic Substances Control. But we have a nickname for it called DTSC, so yeah. So, but no, I'm somewhat hopeful that the kind of issues that people are raising and continuing to raise will make a difference. So I'm, don't give up on DTSC. They have to listen.
But let me just make one comment here. Gordon, I'm wondering if there's something that you can do in terms of getting some media attention for us, because the media has really struggled. We've had no luck with Heather Knight and J.K. Deneen. It's been the smaller media and the Chinese media a little bit that's covered this. But if you had a press conference, I don't know what you can do, but you do have a position that would, where you could get the media interested in this. I'm wondering if you would be willing to do that.
Yes, I will. I will commit to working on a media, with MSNA on a media plan to raise the visibility of this problem, and I think that would help put pressure on there's a good reporter at the Chronicle that really covered the problem with the planning department's use of common sense exemptions on the gas station development projects here in the Sunset District, so I'll follow up with her about it. I can't remember her name. That was 2 years ago, but yeah.
I live across the street from the credit union. In less than 9 months, I'll be in my house 50 years. And I'm appalled at what's going on. I have simply requested an answer on the formaldehyde that was coming out of the mortuary. Nobody has addressed that issue. And it is supposed to be a toxic substance, but there's been no addressing of it from the state. And I've lost faith in these people at the state. We got a letter this week, and the Albright cleaners across the street had about 6 barrels of toxic waste in the parking lot that was adjacent, that was the former credit union parking lot. And those barrels of toxic waste sat in that parking lot for several months. I can't remember when, but I walk my dogs by there every day, and that stuff was there. Now look at what's been going on with Hunters Point and these other places. When they start digging up stuff, there's going to be sand and everything all over all of us. So I don't think that there's any way you can say, well, we'll just stick a vacuum cleaner down there. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. I mean, there's been those little things that crawl around under your grass in the neighborhood, moles, whatever they are. Anyway, they've been crawling around under there, and sand has been spreading around. So this is not something that flows off. And we're all in danger, and we need to do something, and if it's political or no matter what it is, but we have gotten nothing. And these people are full of crap because they did not acknowledge the toxic waste that was taken out of that Albright cleaners. They must have known.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Quick question. So that particular spot is the police credit union parking lot on the south side?
Yes, put the picture.
So somebody should get your information and get it to DTSC, and I'll tell you why. So when the police credit union did sampling of that area, they found high levels in that, of PCE in the soil gas at that parking lot. More important, they found higher levels in the shallow soil gas than the deeper soil gas, which suggests that there was a release at that site.
Yes, I believe those barrels were leaking.
That is a place that's proposed for
That
housing.
was a while back, though.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah,
so,
I know, but I can't remember the date.
that's all.
But I saw those barrels. I worked at Hunters Point.
That's right. One of the things I do when I go around the country is I tell people, You're the neighbors, you're the experts. You know things that happen on these properties that the regulators didn't. And I've got great examples of that. So if anybody remembers things like that, that will help in the investigation.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't actually plan to talk, but my name is Krista Loretto. I live in the neighborhood. I'm a couple blocks off. However, I did just want to actually address everyone here that we, there have been a number of things in the last couple of years, and during the beginning of the pandemic, the supervisors, some of them wanted to put tents in Golden Gate Park. The neighborhood stopped that with building a tent city, basically, with our own advocacy. If each person in this room phoned the mayor tomorrow, phoned all the other supervisors, we stopped Senator Penn 2 weeks ago from mandating vaccines that are not FDA approved to children. We can all stop this. This is where, almost over 100 people probably in this room. If we flooded them with emails and phone calls, I know we have been, but I see that they've been doing it more to stop the project versus the health aspect of everything. And I feel for Gordon. It's a big project. I once wanted his job. I don't actually want it anymore. But I just honestly believe, I've phoned the mayor before, when it was Willie, I took a meeting with him. Phoned Gavin, had a meeting with him. You can actually request a meeting with these people. And they don't necessarily want to, but if everybody phoned them and said, I want to talk to you about something that's important to me in my neighborhood, they will take action. Feinstein, actually, she helped stop the tent city going in Golden Gate Park because we just inundated them with it. So I just say, if everybody just tomorrow make a couple of phone calls and a couple of emails, it'll work.
Thank you.
This question is for Don and or Lenny. What risks should the neighborhood accept for PCE?
So I've been arguing that they should use the residential screening level as the action level. There's no way to totally get away from these chemicals. They're in the outdoor air throughout the Bay Area, so we can't get to zero. But the screening level is based on the state's best estimate of excess lifetime cancer risk of 1 in a million. That means if 1 million people are exposed constantly for, 26 years, then there'll be 1 additional cancer. And that's the level that most activist groups push for. The Department of Toxic Substances Control is saying, well, we typically do something that's five times as high. But given the fact that not only have many people been exposed already for years, but we believe that the levels of contamination were higher in the early years, that's a reasonable thing to ask for. It is a policy decision. The science, as far as I'm concerned, the state science is pretty good, but then you have to say, what risk will you accept? And that is for residential means 0.46 micrograms per cubic meter for PCE. And there's one other thing. There's a strategy called sampling to death. In order to sample enough to make sure that the levels are as low as they're saying, you would have to do so much sampling that it would cost more than actually dealing with the problem. And so it makes a lot more sense, since you know they're elevated levels, to just go ahead and do the mitigation and do the cleanup.
Thank you. I have a question for Supervisor Mar. We talked about today about the agencies and the developer not having the right incentives to come together to remediate this issue. And from my standpoint, it seems like the incentives were taken, they were not given any reason to have incentives to work with the community on this. you recommended legislation to approve the loan that allowed them to buy the site from TNDC, even though it was, from the Police Credit Union, even though we knew it was contaminated. The incentives have been taken away. Will you commit to introducing legislation to introduce incentives so the developer, the MoCD, the city, and all other state and federal agencies who will then hopefully support this project with funding have to come together to remediate this problem before any work on the project takes place?
Let me just say that one key demand or ask, we used to use demands, but somehow asks are nicer, is that the remediation take place before construction.
Yes.
It's going to be a lot harder to rent the site if they build the building and they find out that there are cracks in the foundation and people are being exposed. It's much more cost effective to do the investigation and remediation first.
That's what we want.
One is I will commit to pushing TNDC and the mayor's office to remediate 2550 Irving versus mitigating it, and especially since Don, has shown that soil vapor extraction would actually be cheaper than the vapor barrier. Did I get that right, Don?
That's right.
Yes. So I absolutely will commit to pushing them on it. I will also look at any policy, legislative incentive levers that we can create that would also convince them to do that. I do want to emphasize that the bigger issue here, though, beyond 2550 Irving, is that we have this large plume that's on the entire block, plus under the homes on the north side and probably the south side. There hasn't been tested yet. So I think the bigger issue here is getting DTSC or some other entity to really treat this as one large contaminated site from multiple commingled sources and commit to a full remediation plan that protects the health of the neighborhood and holds all parties accountable. I think that's a bigger issue.
So one more thing about mitigation versus remediation. If the investigation stepping out shows that more homes are impacted by the PCE, and if in fact the neighborhood is successful in getting the action level that I talked about, soil vapor extraction turns out, and it could be coupled with excavation, I'm not ruling that out, soil vapor extraction would be much more cost effective in serving the whole neighborhood. That if the source is removed by vacuuming the sand at the source areas, then it might not be necessary to do anything else to protect the people in the existing homes. So it's what we're calling for is not something that's a huge expense for whoever has to pay for it, and that still has to be resolved. It is a cost-effective solution to a problem that affects both existing residences and future residents.
Question.
I'm sorry, we have a question. Please go ahead, Joe.
My question is, how long should the neighborhood wait to get the answers that this has already been going on for 2 years. We only found out about it last year. And I appreciate that DTSC shared results with the 6 families, but their flyer saying, we'll talk to you in June, is unacceptable to me. If you look at DTSC's map, the plume is projected to be moving north-northwest. The arrow on that map points directly at my house where I live for 20 years with a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And on either side of me are young families with a newborn and other small children. How long are we supposed to wait? I don't know, I've never been through something like this before. What is normal?
So first, in terms of political action, don't wait at all. as Don said, it could take months to do soil vapor extraction. This I call threading the needle. The risk that people are facing is not an immediate acute risk. It's not like getting COVID and worrying about going to the hospital immediately. It is a long-term risk. So it's enough of a risk that something has to be done, but not enough of a risk to panic. Like, I wouldn't leave the neighborhood because of this. So while we want to speed things up as much as we can, the important thing is to get the right investigation so that we know when we do soil vapor extraction that we aren't spreading the plume, but we're actually contracting it. And so it's, unfortunately, they should have done that a year ago. But again, don't panic. This is a long-term risk. Maybe Sam wants to address that.
Yeah, the human, so all the risk assessment is done in animal modeling because you can't go out and dose human populations. Except at Camp Lejeune, which they dosed human populations for 35 years. Then they do an extrapolation and they put in all sorts of, they'll try to determine a level, what they call the lowest observable effect level or no observable effect level in a rat. And then they'll do all sorts of extrapolations and they'll divide by a factor of 10, factor of 1,000, and they'll just basically guess. But the exposure levels here are low. And there's no human epidemiology on levels this low. Now someone proposed, do a study, see are rates of certain illnesses more common, and that's a fabulous idea, but it's a slow idea and it's hard to do. It sounds easy, but it's not, because cancers occur. There are basal rates of cancer. If the risk truly would be just a 1 in a million, a few in a million, then you wouldn't hopefully see any increased rates, right? I think the levels are low. The point is less is more, right? Less is safer. So.
Last question. Hi, good evening. My name is Nancy. And my family has lived in Sunset since 1970, so we've been here for 52 years. Sometimes I feel that Supervisor Gordon Mar, you're caught in the middle. You're caught in the middle between City Hall and your constituents in the Sunset. And we feel for you. What my question for you is, how can we support you? You have the human capital in this room, and what can we do to make it just a tad easier for you to get our message across?
Well, I appreciate that question, Nancy. I mean, I feel like it's my responsibility to support you, in the neighborhood, and particularly MSNA on this issue. And I've been doing my best to do that. I think being able to participate in this important meeting gave me a number of new ideas that I'm going to follow up on. And so I think it's my responsibility as your representative to support you.
I know the challenges the mayor has to deal with the state. We have to go 30,000 houses. We lose the tax credits from California, and you're fighting against with 9 other supervisors for a voice with the mayor. The mayor's pushing this, but I mean, you have this human capital in this room. And if you can give us guidance on what we can do.
Yeah. Actually, maybe the one thing I did want to suggest from this discussion, as far as like who to target, because I know there's been people saying, I appreciate, Krista saying call the mayor, call the other supervisors. Of course, we want everybody to be aware of this and concerned, but I think that right now it's the state. We really need to get the state agency to step up and treat us with the attention that we deserve here, the commitment. So I think Phil Ting is really key here, and it just occurred to me tonight. But I will also follow up with Phil. I have a meeting with him on Friday, so I'm going to be bringing this up again. I know he's been engaged. He's heard from Yi Kwan and others, but I would encourage you to focus on Phil Ting because he's our assignment. He represents us in Sacramento, right on the west side, so,
And the media, we need the media.
yes.
Thank you, Supervisor Mar. And thank you to all of our presenters today. Lots of great information. I'm sorry, we do have to, we are at 9 o'clock and I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. I am most grateful to everyone in the community, and the MSNA absolutely values your support, your engagement. Please communicate with us, either at the meeting, via email. If you want to attend to one of our board meetings, you always welcome the engagement. And thank you so much for supporting our community and for our health. The last thing we'll do tonight, hopefully will be fun, is the raffle. So if folks still have their raffle tickets, we will be announcing the numbers, and all of our prizes are towards the back of the room. So if your number is called, please go to the back of the room to accept your prize. Thank you. Thank you for coming out today.